Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erika Heald, your content chat host. And today I'm being joined by my friend, Maureen Jann, who has a new and interesting role that I can't wait for her to tell us a little bit about. We're doing something, before we get to Maureen introducing herself, I'm just going to say for the next 2 months, we're going to be doing something a little different. And that is we're going to do some conversations that are me one-on-one, primarily with Maureen, and her filling in for me a little bit while I'm doing some travel. But it's all about leading up to the publication of my book on January 13th. Content Foundations is going to be about all the stuff that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. So it's kind of like getting everything ready, getting all the wheels turning. And so to kick it off, we're going to be talking about AI. But first, Maureen, introduce folks to you and let them know who you are and what you do in your new role.
Thanks. If you've seen me on here before, you've known I've been a consultant for a really long time. And then I did a little stint at Twilio, and then I went back to consulting. And now I'm super excited to be the director of North America at Anunta, which is basically a technology organization that deals with virtualization and virtual desktops. And I'm building the marketing department quite a bit and being able to sort of roll out all of these new processes and programs. And I'm super excited about it. We're starting to see some really great progress. I've been there since April. I was a contractor first, but then I went to an employee. So here I am, here for you to talk about AI. Who isn't talking about AI? I do think we have a different take today, though. I'm very excited about that.
We do. And it's all about, using AI in order to really enable you to make the content that AI can't. And that might sound like a contradiction, like, what are you talking about? But let me assure you, if you are somebody who values having a really distinctive voice in content, whether you're a writer person, an editor, a content strategist, it doesn't matter who you are. AI actually can help you do a better job of sounding like your brand, because it takes a lot of noise out of your head, because you're not having to remember whether or not you're allowed to use the serial comma, and please be allowed to use the serial comma. You don't have to remember if this is the director on your team who hates the word enable or empower. You don't need to remember all of these little tics and personality things that every different person in your organization expects you to know. The AI can do it for you. So spoiler alert, we're actually both proponents of using AI, and we're definitely human content creators who believe that we bring a lot of value as humans to the process.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I could not agree more. I'm an everyday user of AI. I think the tricky part though is just like to do if you do your whole job with AI, everything is gonna be beige, right? And I think that's where we run into the challenge.
100%, or grayish, or it ends up being like the broetry that we see on LinkedIn. When I'm on LinkedIn, I can tell that a post was written with AI, not because it has M dashes, which are very human. I've used one forever, and Anne Hanley wrote an amazing supportive piece on the M dash and getting justice for the M dash in her newsletter last week, and everyone should go read it. It is spot on. But some of those posts, you can tell that no human being touched that post other than maybe to Control A, Control C to copy and paste that into LinkedIn, because it's just a bunch of baloney. There's no personal lived experience. Every sentence is short and breathy, and it takes up this much space to say nothing at all. I see those posts all the time, and you can just tell. And the best ones are the ones that are criticizing using AI, or saying, you should use or shouldn't use AI for one of these things. And you're like, but this was definitely used AI, because it also referred to you in the third person on your LinkedIn post. I mean, there are tells like that all the time. So it is kind of hilarious to me.
I think the word broetry may be my new favorite word ever. I think I'm going to put that somewhere very permanently. Not in a tattoo, because that would be dumb, but like very permanently somewhere on a sticky note.
It is a footnote in Defined in my upcoming book, because I felt like I didn't feel like we could talk responsibly about scaling your content without addressing the fact that a lot of people are not using the AI for those things where the human doesn't add value. They're trying to use it to replace the human. Yeah. And I think part of it is just because it feels like it's easy to use AI to just, create content from scratch. It feels easy to say, hey, can you just go and create a LinkedIn post for me? But in fact, it's not that easy from scratch for AI to create anything if you're trying to have an opinion and have it be personal.
I think this is actually the same issue I used to run into earlier in my career when I would try to make thought leadership for people, but they didn't have thoughts. So it's
Or
very
didn't want to talk to you
challenging.
about thoughts that they might have.
Yeah, or like literally they'd be like, this doesn't have a lot of aha moments. And then I was like, maybe that's because you didn't have any aha moments.
Shocking how that works.
I mean, so I don't think AI can do any better for you. I mean, it can quote stats, it can do a bunch of other stuff, but the reality is, junk in, junk out. That's the nut of it. So it's an interesting idea, and I think that it dives into like some of the points that we were thinking about when we were crafting, what we wanted to talk about today was like, because of this ever decreasing, ever eroding quality that we're seeing in, LinkedIn posts alone. That's a good start. I think that we're also seeing, the erosion in trust, right? Where, people are consuming that content, don't believe they wrote that because they see the tells, or it's become so muddy. The waters have become so muddy, you can't pick out what is and is not good.
And people aren't being transparent. So I think that's one of the big things too, is at this point, you have to assume that anybody who's creating content is using AI in some sort of format. Although I think before we get to the end of this conversation, we'll talk about some of the people that are trying to not. But you have to assume that everyone is using built-in AI, even if it's just something as simple as having Grammarly, spell check and grammar check for them. So, I think where we really need to focus is the kind of content that only you or the people within your organization can create.
Yeah.
So assume that the AI tools are going to be the table stakes. They're going to be the thing that enables you to take big pieces of content, chop them up smaller, enables you to streamline your workflows, enables you to be consistent. But what are the things that only you and your people in your organization can deliver?
That's where the magic is. This has always been the problem with AI, though. Like when you try to say AI write opinions for me, or AI do all this research for me, you're going to get, like we had talked about, kind of a gray goo. But if you put the perspective and you put the strength and you put the insights in there, and you have it generate something for you with a strong tone and voice, the quality of what you're going to get is great. I mean, case in point, I recently went to a conference. I put together a ton of notes, right? We had a bunch of notes. Our team had a bunch of notes. We took all of that stuff, as well as some additional articles of writers we talked to at the show, and asked ChatGPT to focus on the 5 big takeaways that we as a team collectively put together. And what it did was generate this delightful post, because we also used my voice as the writer, and we used the brand voice and tone. So not only were we able to sort of triangulate the biggest findings that everybody found across the team, but we were also able to do it in a way that, to this day, which still makes me laugh, I have people reaching out to tell me what a great article and how human I made IT. So, I mean, it can be done, and it's good, and it's interesting, and it's fun to read, and it has personality. That's because we've set up this infrastructure, and we've used insights that only we could bring to the table to do that.
Well, see, and that's the important thing, is the finding those patterns, kind of organizing things and figuring out how to combine them all together. Being that KitchenAid mixer is something that AI is really good at. You give it the ingredients and it helps you get that cake batter ready. You're still baking the cake, you're still frosting it, but it's helping you with that messy middle step. And that's kind of where I feel like writers in particular are not seeing their value. They're focusing on the idea of, well, a good writer can, just remember all the things that their client wants. They can embody the brand voice. And, as somebody who does a lot of writing for a lot of different brands, of course I do that, but I still make a custom GPT for each one of those clients. And I have the GPT grade me and tell me, how good of a job did I do? Is there anything that feels a little off from its objective perspective, and from all of that feedback I've gotten over, let's say, 150 web pages I've written for that brand. And it will remind me, or it'll say, this is good, but have you thought about doing this or that in order to bring in a different perspective? And so it helps me by being a thought partner. It's not generating the work I'm doing for those folks. But what's even more awesome is I give the clients the access to my GPTs, and then they're able to use it with all those people on their team who aren't professional trained writers with 20-something years of experience, who are really anxious about things like when they change the brand voice, who are able to write something that gets across their thoughts. And then they say, hey, this needs to be in the style that we've identified for our blog posts. And it takes it and it cleans it up for them. And that's something that brand, my clients, they can't pay me to do all those things. And I don't want to come in-house and be a full-time person. And I certainly wouldn't want to be a full-time person who was a roadblock, whose desk everything had to come over to make sure it sounded like the brand. That is not how you, a human being, adds any value. I am sorry, that is not a value add. The value add is being the smart person who says we need the governance in place so that way we can have those really smart people with all this experience put together that messy, what I used to always call a word vomit. When I was interviewing people to create thought leadership, I'd be like, give me your word vomit, answer these questions and don't craft them. Just give me all of your thoughts. I will help make it be beautiful. So it's so amazing because it really becomes this way that you go from being this tiny little center of content to being able to be this orchestrator, this collaborator, this person who makes everyone be able to create content. And that, to me, that's the power of using AI well, so that you, this smart human, can go out there and do all the human empathy forward kinds of things that AI is never going to be able to do.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And as somebody, and I know this may come as a surprise, I hate to write. I don't like it. It's not fun. It's not fun for me. I don't enjoy it. I used to call it the barrier between me and getting something done is all the writing parts. And so for me, like if I and I still have to create all this high quality content, and I have to adapt it in all these different situations, kind of like what you were talking about. And and I'm a one-person show, more or less. I have some support here or there, but like I can't do it all and do it well. But if I have tools and I have GPTs in place and I have tone and voice defined and I have nuance for each of these individual writers sorted out, then you can scale. You can just do so much more with so much less. However, those gatekeeper types, I empathize with them, right? Like you have this moment where people are just genuinely still afraid, and honestly, for good reason. There is some scary stuff happening in the world,
Yep.
and I think that seeing some of these writing jobs disappear is difficult and can, especially as a consultant and as somebody who's a consultant for a really long time, I empathize with why people would want to gatekeep, but I would across the board say that is going to do you no favors.
And
It's
frankly, the two bosses I had in my history as an internal person, the two bosses who did not document process, who did not share things widely, who were that little center of knowledge themselves, they were the ones who got laid off. And it was painful for the rest of us left behind. It didn't save their jobs.
No, it doesn't save their jobs. It also doesn't make them strategic. And I think that now more than ever, we're running into the fact that if you can't prove strategic value in an organization, you're going to suffer. Your job is going to suffer. Your ability to execute is going to suffer, and your ability to, have longevity in your role is going to suffer. So, I mean, everybody knows that ChatGPT and Claude and all of these tools exist. And if they don't see you using it strategically, if they see you gatekeeping, if they see you hoarding knowledge, if they see you just being a worker bee, like just churning information, that's such an easy low-hanging fruit, right? That's an easy yes to who should I lay off?
Yeah. So what can you do about it? Well, we actually made a list of 8 things that we think are incredibly human-focused pieces of content programs, content types, that if you focus on doing these things, this is where you add the value that the AI can't. So why don't we start, Maureen, with talking about first-party data and research, because you have done some amazing, amazing stuff in this area.
Thanks. Yeah, I've learned a lot about this in the last couple of years, and I would like to give credit to Amy Higgins for giving me an opportunity to really learn about that. She's at Cloudflare, that's right. She's the head of content at Cloudflare now. I don't know. She's a busy lady. Sometimes I can't keep up with her. She's scuba diving. She's doing content. She's on shows. She's speaking. She's maniac. But she gave me an opportunity to really dive into that for Twilio, and I've gotten to take that concept of third part or first party data where we collect the information and we ask the community what's going to happen and what's impacting them and how we can do this. And I've been able to scale some of that down to a smaller business perspective. So it's been really fun to learn about how to use real perspectives from real people to help us as marketers and help us as businesses get insights into what's really important in today's in the landscape that applies to you. So for instance, I recently did what's called a gap report. And the gap report is essentially I asked users, what do they think about certain topics in the, their IT experience? And then I asked IT leaders, what do they think about their experience? And then we were able to see where the gaps were between leadership perspective and then also the user's perspective. We're going to launch this in a couple of weeks. Actually, it's next week. Yeah, it's really cool. So then we have this first party data, this first party insight that helps us boil this down to like, what are the problems? Why are we not getting what we need from our people? Or why aren't our people getting what they need from us? And how can we turn that into something that's the insight, right? And if you happen to be the expert that can help solve the middle bit, then you can offer all of this juicy information. So not only are you combining this first party research where you're learning from the real people who are experiencing these real problems, but you're also able to like show off your expertise because you know how to fix the problem. And I used AI through that entire experience. I had it say, take a look at this data. Here's our position. Here's some of the stuff that our team has been saying about this topic. What should we say? How can we boil this down into 5 particular points? And it came up with 5 main gaps, right? So here are the big gaps we're seeing, and here's how we would recommend looking at this from an engineering perspective, from a leadership perspective, from a boots on the ground perspective. So such an interesting way to dive deeply into content that is unique and only done by you. And honestly, I used SurveyMonkey's market research stuff. It was only $5,000 for the research, which if you know about research, it could be in the 70, 100,000 range. It's just bonkers. But it was a really interesting experience that allowed us to put something out to create an impact and create conversation points from a customer's perspective and through the sales process as well.
So that leads into, one of my favorite things that only humans can create. And it really does come from the data and the information in your spreadsheets and in those conversations with customer success managers. And that's those customer and employee stories about the difference that your product or services have made in their lives. When I was at Anaplan, I inherited a bunch of really generic and boring case studies that could have been written by a computer, but they were sadly written by human beings who thought that the point of a case study was to cram in as many of the brand messaging points as possible into 500-ish words. I, on the other hand, as somebody whose background is magazine journalism, I love doing customer stories and employee stories because you're going to be able to hear how real life people talk about the scenarios they were in, the problems that they were facing, and how they solved them. And that's going to be so much more real and engaging than anything that you can come up with if you're trying to fit it into your little cookie cutter mold of your messaging. That's just silly, and you're going to find out, for example, I want to say about 30 case studies for Slack before they were acquired by Salesforce. And I would get transcripts from conversations with, between CSRs and customers. And I would read through them. And then I would come up with these really kind of behind the scenes looks at how people were integrating Slack within their workflows for doing all sorts of things. So giving people ideas for use cases they hadn't even thought of. And that was, again, taking it directly from what the people were sharing voluntarily with their teams. that's the kind of stuff that you can't imagine, that AI can't make up, but AI 100% can go in and then take all of that kind of content and help you understand, well, how do you approach people? What's the like warm up for getting somebody to be ready to do a case study? Because if you go out of the gate with a new customer and say, hi, can we feature in a customer case study? They're probably going to say no. So when I had one of my clients last year, I worked with the customer case studies they had and understanding the process, and I had AI help me figure out what is the right cadence for what do you ask for first. Like first you ask for some one-on-one feedback. Next you ask if you can quote a piece of that feedback that they've given that was really good, or a social post, and on and on. I mapped it all out, and even had AI help craft, here's the email that you send and how you customize it. All this kind of stuff to turn something that had been random and ad hoc into a process. And I feel like AI can be really, really good at that, creating a recipe from what you're already doing.
Process is such a good segue to our next one too. But I love that idea of having it help you pace it out and help you ask the right question at the right time so you get the best answer. Because as we all know, it once again, this is a little like approaching a mystery dog. You put your hand on, you're like, smell my, yeah, I'm okay, right? Customers are, very similar. You want to approach them carefully. You want to be gentle. You want to make sure that you don't smell funny to them. So like this is it's such a good way to like make sure that you don't overwhelm a customer at the first go. But as for like processes, that's another great thing to share from your internal IP, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are a well-organized organization and you are doing the work of creating repeatable processes, you have things to share. That sort of expertise and understanding and deep and frameworks and playbooks. Those are all things that make insanely good content, right? Because you know what works. You've been in the field. You understand how you can take a customer from, baby steps all the way to fully mature implementation. You know how to, create end pieces, end pieces of content to make sure that they capture the nut of what you're trying to do. And those types of frameworks are such good fuel for great content.
Totally agreed. And the thing is that while, AI may help you realize that you have a great repeatable process or help you put it into a consumable format, you, the human, is the one that comes up with the way of approaching something and with understanding how to break it down and how everything plays together. So you can't have that behind the scenes process content that you're creating without human beings being there. But it's so great too, because especially if you're talking about how you approach something that is one of your customers' big challenges, whether or not it's one of the big challenges that your product or service actually helps them with, just sharing that, showing that you have these same, showing them with empathy that you have the same challenges they do. And here's how you have addressed them. That's how you build trust. And, we can't trust the AI. We know AI hallucinates. We know that it makes stuff up. Like when it, you ask it to write your own bio and it tells you you've written 2 books. I wish I've written 2 books. You can't trust the AI. You have to use it and verify. So when any of these things that are that building trust and empathy and that relatability, that is a really good place for you to be focusing your energy.
Yeah, and what's nice about those frameworks is you can use the industry stats, the real industry stats, combined with your customer stories to help support why you are going through this process and why you're choosing the choices that you made, and what your customers have said during this process to help sort of help you develop it, and even the story of the development of the content or of the framework is a great story. This is what we learned. This is how we came about. Creating transparency, and in the industry that I'm in around IT, transparency is our number one process when it comes to content and marketing, because like IT people don't believe marketing, period, end of story. Marketers don't believe marketing either. Let's be honest. Yeah. So I empathize on a soul level. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I wouldn't believe me either. So it's so helpful to show the process of developing the playbook and why you've made changes and choices over time and how that really shifts your perspective and really builds trust about experience and and timelines and creation and depth and breadth of customer experiences.
And part of that transparency, which, I want to put a pin in that because you just mentioned transparency. Part of it is being open about how you are using AI. For example, if you're looking at the recap for this conversation we're having right now, when you're looking at this recap on our website, you'll notice it doesn't say that I wrote the recap or that Maureen wrote the recap or that Alec on my team wrote the recap. It says that the content chat recap GPT Pro wrote it, because that's who's going to write the recap. The humans are going to go in and make sure that it didn't make us sound smarter than we are by incorporating quotes that we've said places other than in this conversation. But ChatGPT is going to write the recap from this because it's really good at summarizing and organizing information. But it's not going to be the one that came up with all the ideas that we're talking about or is sharing the experiences, because it doesn't have any experiences. But 100% building in that transparency and saying, hey, AI did this thing over here, makes people be able to trust you because they're not having to guess and wonder if it was you or not.
Yep, absolutely. And then I think that dovetails nicely into talking a little bit more about the behind the scenes content, because it doesn't matter that ChatGPT wrote it if you're sharing real useful information. If you're sharing your experience in a way that's relatable and valuable and useful to people, who cares? Who cares who wrote it?
Because we still know that ChatGPT isn't the human with the job experience or having the customer conversations, that it is just your helper. It's helping you like somebody running behind you taking notes. Or back in the day, we had some folks who, would have that videographer shadowing them everywhere to make sure that they had those Instagrammable moments captured. Well, now, we can have AI make sure that we're capturing those moments. Like, do you have meetings where you don't use professional meetings where you don't use a note taker? Because I record everything. Same. I don't want to have to remember the exact phrasing of something that flies out of my mouth that someone loves. Yeah. I have even stopped in the middle of a conversation with the client at their request to go and look at my Otter AI transcript, because we will sometimes do adjusting of copy live where we go back and forth, in a conversation. And they'll love something I've said, and they'll be like, okay, what did you just say? And I'll go, hold on, let me check. Because I don't remember, because if I'm doing that iteration, I'm not listening to me.
No. Why would you? I immediately forget to. You're like, that fell out. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Well, I think that true to that behind the scenes content, showing honesty, admitting when you make a mistake, lesson learned, failures. Oh my gosh, if you can get somebody to talk about failure, that is one of my favorite pieces of content, because it's perceived as so risky, right? What a risk to talk about something that you failed at. But I love that the assumption is everybody is perfect all the time, and we're not actually, like, nobody ever makes a mistake, and so it's not a real thing. But we all know that we make mistakes. We all know that we have had a bad customer engagement. We all know that there has been unceremonious firings happening. So to talk through what a failing is, and I recommend people test the waters on this. Like, this didn't work, but this did. Great. That's like a failure post, but what a juicy piece of content to show what you've dug into and how you've broken it, how you fixed it, right? This is actually very similar to what you do in an interview. Tell me about a time where you ran into a challenge where you could blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, I did run into that challenge and here's how I fixed it, right? But this is the same thing. You're in a job interview with the organization. Like, your customers are interviewing you and figuring out if you're a good fit. Why wouldn't you show them a time you overcame some complicated challenge?
And what's cool about that is that actually, that's a way that you can start to uncover, what makes your organization and the people that work for you different. And so, that's a whole different can of, content, inspiration, all the things that are different about the community you've built up around your company, the company culture, all of that stuff, can come, it kind of levels up in the process of talking about the behind the scenes. Because if you have, for example, a really engaged customer advisory board, that you meet with regularly, you're going to be getting insights from them all the time. Or like with Content Chat, I've been hosting this. It's going to be 10 years in June that I've been the host of Content Chat. And I have learned so many things. And, you know, in my book that comes out in January, Content Foundations, I quote all sorts of these smart people. I quote you, Maureen, because you've been, you know, in the hot seat multiple times. I quote all of these folks, and then I actually say, and here's where you can hear the rest of this conversation, you know, because we do have so many insights from our community, and that's something that our human brains are going to be the ones pulling out.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And you know, to that point about the cultural part of things, I have such a mixed feeling about about company culture information and articles and stuff that you publish about your company culture. I really struggle with
I
it
mean,
because
like, it's
sometimes
coerced, because we've all worked places where it was very coerced.
not just coerced, but like syrupy nonsense. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Gosh, I really struggle with that. And so, although I do think that there is a place for cultural content and talking about, you know, the internal culture and why it's great to work here, et cetera, et cetera, I feel like we can do better, right? You know, I saw a company a couple of years ago who was putting together posts about their people and what they do when they're not working. I loved that post. I was like, whoa, that's such an interesting way to take the skills that you have and turn them on their head, or totally throw out those skills and go windsurfing or something. You know what I mean? And um and at the bottom there was like a little section that said, you know, do you bring anything from this hobby to work with you? And hearing how they incorporate things that they do in their off hours, because some of the best innovation is intersections of things that don't make sense, right? It's you learn this from this, and then you're able to apply it in this innovative way. It's really exciting. It's such a neat concept. So I think that was a good way to do it, where it wasn't just basically kissing the company's own butt, because I don't have room for that. Like, I get very annoyed.
Well, and sometimes the way that you can really create that great culture content is if you're not the one creating it. And the example I can now very happily use for that is Chewy. On Mother's Day weekend, Chewy sent me a painting of my kitten Sylvie. I was like, what is this? And it was, you know, I ended up sharing it after the weekend on social. And I said, you know, this was just such the sweet thing. I can't believe it. And it also broke my heart because my kitty Bolvar, we'd had to put him to sleep the day before Mother's Day. And so I'd gotten this beautiful, wonderful celebration of my baby when I had to put my kitty to sleep. And I shared that on Instagram. Chewy sent me a bouquet of flowers. They
Oh
didn't
my
need to
God.
do that, but somebody, I know, right? I'm all like, somebody at Chewy, a human being, said, you know, we tried to give her a joyful moment, but she's having this rough time. And they sent me flowers. That's such a human thing. And that, me telling the story about their culture,
Yeah.
that is so much more impactful than them writing something about their culture, right? I just told you everything you need to know about those people
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now.
Well, but you also as a company need to have a culture that allows for remarkable moments for people to do that, right? So AI can't replicate that kind of thing. That's something that human beings need to say. We all agree, if we see a good reason, we have a budget for flowers that we're going to send. You know, we have a budget for gifts. We have a budget for whatever. We have a comment, or we have like a you know a, a an agreement with an artist to do these things 5 times a month, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you could just budget all that stuff out and know that you've like, hey, we have one more left of this painting. We should send this out because I saw this post about this thing. What a magical, weird, super cool budget line item to have.
All right. I have to pause this before we go on to our next one because we just got a comment from somebody watching us live. And speaking of weird, Maureen and I are known for our unusual turns of phrase. And thank you, Gisela. I love that you pointed out Maureen's syrupy nonsense and my word vomit. I have said word vomit in so many meetings, and there are people who react very viscerally to that. But in general, people say, we get it now. We get it, what you mean. You want it to be unfiltered, just all the things. So thank you for noticing and embracing
Yeah.
our weirdness, because we certainly try to do that too.
Yeah, all we're missing really is Aaron her shoe to come and hang out with us and make up other words. So, all right, we have a couple more of things
Yep.
to talk about before it gets much later. Oh, customer signals and feedback loops. I have to tell you, I'm obsessed with this. I newly got access to Gong
Mm-hmm.
for my organization, and listening to sales calls is my favorite thing ever. Like, I don't know why. Like, I just sit and I listen to, well, you rarely as marketers get invited to sales
Yeah.
calls. It's hard to get on them. People get very protective. They're very like, and I'm a marketing generalist, so I'm doing all kinds of things, the content being one of them, but to building decks and all the things that you have to do to support sales. And it's so hard to do that without real insights into what's happening. Also, gold mine for content, real conversations that our customers are having with our sales team, talking about their challenges. Oh,
And you're like, oh, what if we had an ebook on that? What if we had an explainer video? And you try to go at it the other way by being like asking sales, hey, what do you guys think you need for enablement? And they're like, oh, I need a newsletter, or I need an email template, or whatever. That is not where you add value. Where you add value is doing what you're doing, which is listening to those conversations and imagining how you could help based upon things that you've done and things that you are hearing that those customers are saying.
yeah, it really takes us out of the role of order taker, right? It really puts us in the role of strategist. So, I mean, number one piece of a recommendation, like number one recommendation for amazing content, record all your sales calls, make them available to your marketing people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would be floored at what kind of gems you can pull out. Literally, I was in my role. I was a contractor in my role in the beginning. I listened to like 4 sales calls, and I was like, oh, here's a suite of content. And my manager was like, oh. And it was so fun too, because I knew that they were impactful pieces. I knew right out of the gate. I knew I was grabbing things that were real challenges for our customers, and I was able to build out messaging frameworks based on that kind of information. It was really incredible.
Love that. And I will disclose that I worked at People AI as a consultant and as their fractional head of content for a little over a year. And that's the service that they do. And so what was fun for me was coming up with like all of those ways that you could be using that, using those conversations to, support your marketing team, to coach your sales team, to do so many things throughout the organization. So that was actually really, really fun to be the human figuring out how to harness the AI in that kind of a way.
I think CSAT's another great way to do this, right? If you actually do CSAT surveys to understand what's working and what doesn't, that kind of feedback loop is where a good portion of the magic lays too, because you're able to see. And I know that we get up in our own business about having negative reviews or negative feedback, but the reality is those are just opportunities, such good opportunities for us to help combat perception. It's help. Like dig into challenges, internal challenges. It's an
And it
opportunity for
builds
us.
trust because it shows that you aren't just deleting any bad reviews. It shows that you're getting that feedback, and then you're hopefully publicly responding to it if it's actual feedback from a real user and not just somebody trolling you on the internet, which does happen.
It does, and I think if you tell the story of that, and this is a thing, I love this kind of thing. I get all excited about it. But like if somebody gives me a bad feedback, and then you go and you say, okay, let me do a hard look at this. And then you go talk to your people and you go talk to your customer and you go figure it out and you make changes and improvements based on what you're learning through that process. What an incredible piece of content to show that you're listening and making changes and creating transparency for your user. It's just so juicy.
Well, and similarly, we all, if you're in a large enough organization, you're going to have partners that you're working with on all sorts of things. These can be folks that you're integrating with. They could be people that you're co-creating things with, or you can just have a partnership that's based on the fact that you are marketing to the same group of people and that you have complementary products. And I know that's an area that you have, that you definitely have some experience with doing that kind of partnership and ecosystem content, which is something you're going to be talking about on one of the weeks that I'm out coming up.
I'm actually, this is gonna be really fun because I'm learning about partnership. I mean, I know quite a bit about working with agencies because I've run an agency. I know a lot about working with freelancers because I've been a freelancer. But partnership in ecosystem content is a whole different process, and it's very meta the farther you get away from the sales process. And so I'm really learning about that and how to combine perspectives and combine data outcomes. And then also, like, not only are you providing content for their end customer, which would be similar to your customer, but you're providing information for that internal org to understand what you do and why they should care about what you're doing in the first place. And so there's like it becomes very like the layers of an onion. But you cannot make that stuff up because your partnership and your function and their function is a unique meshing, right? You can't make that stuff up with AI. You have to use what they do and what you do and create something unique that helps them understand your value proposition. And so I'm going through this process right now. We're starting to really launch that partnership program. And so I'm learning a ton about that. Is that something you've done much of?
I've tried to do it, but it can be tough. The most recent time when we tried to do it, it was working with doing some joint research, and it was hard. It was harder than I feel like it should have been to get it together, and a lot of it had to do with figuring out who was going to pay for what versus who was going to decide about what. So it was the RACI chart meeting the budget line item, which made it difficult. That said, it's so much more impactful when you're doing things like, if you want to do a really juicy piece of industry research, being able to partner with somebody like the way that Marketing Profs and the Content Marketing Institute for 15 years now, I guess, or however many years, has been doing their research. It's so much more impactful because it's both of them together. And then they do a whole slice of the data, looking at it, they look at it from a B2B standpoint, and they look at it from a B2C standpoint. They look at it from a technology standpoint. They do all these different cuts of that research data, and they have different partners that are aligned with that audience. So that way they're getting the insights from the experts in those areas to look at the data through that lens, but they're also making sure that they're getting all of those people incorporated into their base of people doing the survey in the first place.
Yeah. And you can share some budget there too. I think that's an opportunity, right? Where you're like, here is the brief of what we're trying to do. Now let's pool our resources and come up with something that's greater than the sum of its parts. So, and then you can kind of go back through the whole list of things that we've been talking about and say, maybe we should do some first party research. Maybe we should talk about a customer story. Maybe we should do and you can do it. But you're right. More people, much like every group project that has ever been group project, it's awful and challenging. And you have to navigate a lot of personalities and priorities and personality types. So
totally. And I think last but not least, I want to talk about, interactive content formats. And for me, I put together, when I was going through the process of figuring out how I wanted to talk about all the stuff I wanted to cover in my book, content governance would be the authoritative official umbrella that you would group all the things I talk about under, but it sounds really scary and boring and corporate.
it really does.
That I didn't want my book to sound. So I put together an interactive assessment to see where people were on their journey with all the foundational elements that go into going from having a content strategy to having a scalable content program, with all the things you need to have put together. And so I did this really fun interactive assessment that then gave people their results and feedback and what have you. And from doing that process and getting feedback from people, it gave me the insights into how I wanted to talk about all of this in my book. And it influenced even the title. My book is not called Content Governance, it's called Content Foundations, because governance it's accurate, but it is not friendly. It is not inviting. It sounds like homework. Nobody wants to buy your book that's about homework. They want to buy your book that is going to help them build something awesome. So, I think that that's another thing that's really cool, is that you can create content that is interactive, that in and of itself is really engaging and builds the relationship with your audience. But then it can also influence content you create later that you wouldn't have created, or a way of thinking about things that wouldn't have been there if you hadn't done that interactive content that allows people to play with it.
Absolutely. I've done lots of surveys and turned that survey into like more content. But my latest obsession with interactive content right now is vibe coding. You know, it's like all that stuff. Where most of what we've been doing lately has been, most of what we've been doing from an interactive content perspective has really been relying on the frameworks that we have available to us, like Typeform or something along those lines. But now we can custom code things on our own. We've been left alone with all of the toys. Now we get to make cool stuff. So I've been experimenting with the total cost of ownership calculator for the organization that I work for.
That's
And
so fun.
yeah, so fun. And it's like, and because I'm doing it in a way that's like, and it's almost like iframe embeddable, but I custom created it. And then you can actually also set up all the triggers that come after that. And it's unbelievably fun.
I love that.
Such a good time. And so like I think that more than ever we have this amazing opportunity to take our wild ideas, these dreams that we have as marketers, like what would be so cool to do? I'd love to make an ROI calculator, but everybody's like, oh, it's too hard. Oh,
Or, oh, you can't have the budget for that. We don't have the budget.
Custom development is too expensive. No worries. Hold my beer. Let's go. Right? I am, of course, like I'm probably every IT department's nightmare, because I'm like, I found a tool that will build stuff.
Well, yes, I did always have the most exceptions to the IT policy every place that I've ever worked in house, Maureen. How did you know?
Be like, I'm gonna break some stuff. You need to take some of that away.
So I think, to sum all this up, basically, AI is this amazing new employee that you've hired to come in and help you do all the things you don't want to do, or the things that are just kind of sweeping up, making things tidy.
Yeah.
That's great. Because you, the human being with all of your experience, you cannot be replaced if you are thinking through what are the things that only you, the human being, can do. And those things that you could do, and maybe even you're good at doing, but if it can be outsourced in that way without impacting the quality and the accuracy, why would you not want to be able to spend more time on doing the things that the robots can't? That, for me, feels like an obvious no-brainer.
I agree. And I think it's time to put, I know the SEO and AEO and AIO and all those things are a big piece of this, and we have been creating, it's still to this day, I see generic content that's being created that's answering basic garbage questions that need to be on there because you want to be found in case somebody asks this. But let me tell you right now that the time for generic who cares questions is coming to an end, and that if you're not offering proprietary, unique information that isn't covering a topic that's already been covered, or is covering a topic that hasn't been covered yet, we're all, us as content creators, are in a world of hurt, in line for a world of hurt, right? We really need to be focusing on proprietary content, only stuff that we can generate in our unique organization so that we can be found when you really want to be found. Do you really want to be found for the most generic term, whether it's AIO or SEO? No. You want to be found for what you're great at.
So hopefully this conversation today has given you a different perspective when you're thinking about AI tools, especially if you're a writer person. And I hope it also gives you a little peek into what you can expect while Maureen and I meet and start on talking about all of these things. Although I will note, next week, you're going to have to be seeing just Maureen, unless you're in Boston, because I'm going to be in Boston speaking at Marketing Profs about my AAA content governance framework. So I'll be talking about some of the stuff that we talked about today. So you'll be able to see me in person and ask me all your questions. And Maureen is going to be in the hot seat leading a fun conversation.
I'm not going to be alone. I'm going to find a friend.
Excellent. You're going to phone a friend.
Phone a friend.
Thank you so much for joining us for Content Chat, and we'll be back again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.